afternoon or good evening once again, dear listeners, and welcome back to the HorrorCultFilms Podcast. My name's David Smith, and I have the pleasure of being joined tonight by my wonderful partner and very often editor, Emma Lee. Say hi, Emma.
Hello.
Tonight's big feature is the documentary Clapboard Jungle, an emotional and educational journey that follows 5 years in the life and career of independent filmmaker Justin McConnell. And joining us to talk about it is none other than Justin himself. But before we talk Clapboard Jungle, let's discuss what we've been watching. We've been watching a lot of the same stuff, but you've got some things that I haven't seen, of course. What have you been watching in my absence?
So I haven't been watching very many films at the moment at all. I've been watching Attack on Titan, which is in its final season, and I only just got into it about 2 months ago. So I'm very obsessed with it already. And I think I watched about 5 years worth of episodes in about 3 days. So I'm looking forward to the ending, which is coming very, very soon.
So what is so darn good about Attack on Titan anyway?
I think Attack on Titan is very, very dark, and it begins as this story following a teenage boy. In fact, at the very beginning, he's younger than that, and his friends in this extraordinary, circumstance where all of humanity is behind these walls, and they're in a sort of, I think it feels like a sort of kind of medieval or like early period in history, but there are these monsters who live outside the walls and who humanity fears. And there's this threat that's looming over them that the Titans, these giant, like sort of grotesque figures who are super strong but also seem to sort of lack consciousness, are going to come and destroy the civilization. And it's really violent. It is really psychologically troubling at times. But I think it appealed to me because, of all horror genres, I would say my favourite is probably like zombie apocalypse films.
Oh, you love a good zombie apocalypse film.
Yeah, I love zombie films. So it feels like that because, except it's zombies plus almost, because it's not, many like depictions of zombies in the horror are sort of these like decaying corpses, look quite monstrous, and depending on the fast or slow zombie thing is a debate for another day, but the Titans are huge. But they also, like, their facial expressions are quite horrific. Like, if you look at the pictures of them, they're pretty grim, like nightmare stuff. And I think that at the very beginning, it feels like a sort of run-of-the-mill, like, fantasy anime where these characters are learning to be strong so they can fight monsters. But it actually becomes very sort of psychologically and politically nuanced as the show develops. And I can't really talk more about the specifics without spoiling it, because there's quite a lot of twists and turns along the way. But I would definitely recommend it to anybody who's looking for several dozens of hours of television to get stuck into. But it's dark, brooding stuff.
And what else have you been watching?
I've been watching WandaVision, and WandaVision basically kicked off an entire rewatch of the MCU, which led to first-time watch of some of the DCU films, which I know you've been discussing recently, leading up to the Justice League versus the Snyder Cut. So I think we are up to Aquaman now.
Yes,
still got Aquaman to watch.
Now that Zack Snyder's one's happened, I'm sort of like, I've sort of lost the motivation to watch the rest of them.
I feel completely the same. Do you know what? It was really interesting, actually, when rewatching Clapboard Jungle, there was a scene where they're talking about editing and about how, it's great to be concise and like to remember what to leave out and stuff. And I think that the Snyder Cut of the Justice League is basically like, proving almost that sometimes the opposite is true, because I think it's much better for having no real restraints when it comes to time, in my humble opinion, versus the other one.
I think with WandaVision, spoiler alert, I really liked the show, but I thought the finale was strangely ordinary. I understand that parts of it were different because of COVID, right? Because they were shooting that alongside the pandemic. I'm wondering if that influenced the ending at all.
Do you know, it was interesting because I also thought it was a bit pedestrian considering how ambitious I felt like it had been story-wise in the episodes sort of leading up to it, especially the first couple of episodes, which sort of, throw you into this world where you have no real idea of what's happening. And I mean, the first episode is like a Dick Van Dyke Show style sitcom, and I don't really think there's any indication of what the rest of the show is going to be like for like a casual viewer at the very beginning. But watching the sort of making of, I think Elizabeth Olsen and some of the other people who were interviewed were talking about how that sort of flying in the air fight scene had never really been done in a Marvel film before. And we're talking about it as if it was kind of something new and something really interesting to bring to the MCU. But I would agree with you. I really don't think that it sort of lived up to the hype that I think was successfully built up to that point.
I mean, fair play. One thing I will say it did do well is it still honoured its character arcs with the action. I don't think it ever lost sight of that this is essentially a show about someone grieving.
Yeah.
And, as we get, like, at the end of the first episode, obviously the audience are like, oh, something's amiss. It's been a wee while since I saw it, but I recall Vision is dead. And then as the episode goes on, you get little bursts of the outside world. And then as the show goes on, it really honed into the characters more. I thought that made it something really, like, pretty special, really. I just sort of wish that the... I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I guess I was half expecting the multiverse to suddenly burst open and like the X-Men would come running in or something like that. But, maybe it was just stunt casting of Evan Peters.
I don't know. Like, I've seen some theories online which sort of suggest that the Evan Peters cameo was setting up something else, that potentially one of them being that he is the person who... Randall Park's character, whose name I've completely forgotten now, says he has in witness protection. The episode where they go to the like border of Westview, Monica, and I cannot remember what that guy's name is, the FBI agent.
Woo!
Ah, yes. He basically says that there's he's got somebody in Westview, and that's how he became aware of the fact that there was this sort of anomaly. But yeah, I don't know. I suppose something I hadn't remembered about when I started watching WandaVision is that Marvel had like an entire year of content planned. And I suppose like kicking off at the beginning with the opening of the multiverse with the X-Men and all the rest of it, before all of these other things had happened, I guess I maybe should have thought, oh yeah, it's not likely to be that like at the very beginning of, what is this, stage 4? Stage 5? Stage 4.
So I have been watching 2 movies recently. First is The Last Warning. This is an old silent film, and therefore I find it quite difficult to get into it. I don't watch silent films very often. This one has a strangely complicated plot and kind of overacting where they have to sell the emotion in the absence of dialogue. Still, while I wouldn't necessarily say I particularly liked it, I really did enjoy the novelty of watching it. There's some really good shots, it's very atmospheric, and very still an intriguing mystery at its core. The other thing I saw, which I really would recommend, is I Kill Giants. I Kill Giants is on Netflix, currently buried somewhere in the fantasy section. Now, something I was thinking about recently is, what if algorithms eventually learn to predict our behaviour better than we can? That's not a comforting thought, but this was a Netflix recommendation, and it was just right for me. I Kill Giants is Life is Strange meets a troll hunter. It's a story of a young girl who protects her hometown from some giants, or so she thinks she's doing. The audience know from the start that the giants aren't really there. We get that they're a metaphor for something. And so what we have smuggled into this children's fantasy adventure is a very good coming-of-age story. I Kill Giants is a superb drama fantasy about life, death, and childhood imagination with a really likeable protagonist, some excellent presentation, and a lot of heart. Look it up. It's on Netflix right now. Get your money's worth. Now, let's move on to the news section. Here's where I wish we had a really good jingle, but we don't. There's two big bits of news that have come up. I don't know if you've heard, Emma, but there's meant to be a Rocky TV series coming soon. And all we know is it'll be a prequel, and Sylvester Stallone says that it will really get to the heart of the characters.
Oh, come on.
What do you think of that?
No. I love Rocky, the franchise and the man, more than the average person does. More than the average viewer of Rocky films. And I just think this is a terrible, terrible idea. Because the thing is, quite similarly to, let's say, for example, the Solo. Like, you're taking a character, potentially, who we first meet in, like, not quite middle age, but, like, in their early 30s, mid-30s.
Not quite middle age. Early 30s.
I was just thinking about how old Sylvester Stallone looks in like the first Rocky film. But
Tough paper round.
No, I mean, what I mean is you're looking at like somebody who's an adult, who's already kind of like undergone some sort of arc, and they haven't hit their prime yet. Like, that's why Rocky's such a great underdog story, because you've got the sense of somebody who's like been beaten down by a lot in life. And, you know, when we first meet Rocky, he's like battering people for loan sharks. The same way as when we first meet Han Solo, you know, he's just like a smuggler. Like, and we have these characters who, in the first installment of what becomes, you know, a very long-standing, decades-long franchise, have to learn to want to collaborate with people and to kind of work towards a greater goal or something, and discover whatever it is that, you know, really brings their character to fruition, I suppose. And going back and looking at that person when they're young, I just don't really see what is to be gained from that, because it's telling a completely different story.
I completely agree with you. I think the thing is that the character can't really undergo an arc, because they have to finish at a point where they could begin an arc. And we know that because we've already seen the arc, right? With Solo, it was a particularly silly one because, like, you know, we see him as essentially being neutral, unlawful, or whatever the category would be. Point being, he's meant to be politically ambivalent. However, because Solo, a Star Wars story, has to feature some sort of character journey in it, he ends up giving all his money to fund a Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance that he doesn't give a fuck about in episode 4.
Exactly.
Like, these guys would have statues in his honor by this point. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, yeah,
you know?
I don't know. Unless there's some sort of unseen... I don't know if the Solo films were initially also supposed to be a trilogy, but I don't know if there's like some unseen event, off-camera event that makes him completely lose any sort of, you know, he becomes cynical again in between films. But in the absence of, you know, any more filler to kind of like fill up those plot holes, it just seems a bit redundant. And I think even though I know Sylvester Stallone is attached to write episodes for this show, or I don't know if he's a creator or whatever, but his involvement just kind of makes me feel like, I don't know, like, is there really any story left to tell for Rocky? Like, I mean, I love like Rockies 1 through 4, but after 4, like, I really feel like we don't really need a huge amount more until, of course, Rocky Balboa, which I think by that point you're coming at it from a completely different angle.
It's basically damage control.
I think, but you are then looking at somebody who's in a completely different place in their life. Like, you know, in Rocky 5, like, I know that he's not, you know, he is sort of still a sort of has-been, but not really in the same way. He's still young enough that angle can't really be properly played for like its full emotional depth, I guess. Whereas with Rocky Balboa, you're looking at somebody who is so much older and has been through more tragedy and has lost a lot more, and is kind of, it's able to bring something new to the franchise and new to the character. But with a prequel, you're dealing with stuff that's already happened. You're dealing with, by the time we meet Rocky, whatever is going to happen in this prequel will have happened. Like you said, you're bringing somebody up to the point of this. But the point at which we meet Rocky, he isn't really somebody whose story kind of undergone a really satisfying arc.
No, of course not, because the thing is, we lose what the series is defined by. And the series is defined by its optimism. The kind of, yes, anyone can do it attitude, from rags to riches, from chump to champ, right? And this is what underlies the whole thing. Here, the journey will have to go from someone getting further and further into the loan shark industry. And I really hope it ends with the announcement that he's about to step in the ring to fight Spider Rico, right? that's our story, right? And the other bit of news for long ongoing stories is the trailer for the new Saw film. What did you think of that trailer? I
really, really liked it until one of the final shots where Chris Rock has his hand handcuffed to a drain pipe. I'm like, oh no, come on. It looked really good. The moment I heard about this story of like Chris, I can't remember if it was an event, but like Chris Rock basically like walking up to Dan Lynn Boseman and being like, hey, like I have an idea for a Saw film. That is an immediately intriguing scenario. And I don't know. I don't think I've seen Chris Rock in any sort of like dramatic role. Have you seen him in anything dramatic before?
I don't think so, no. The thing is, like, some horror fans went, oh, they're getting Chris Rock in. Now they're getting desperate. You're like, hold on. This series needs Chris Rock a lot more from the other way around, right? Like, Chris Rock is presumably taking a pretty major pay cut to make this, right?
Yeah.
Like, this guy can command tens of millions of dollars for just doing some shite Adam Sandler piece, right? This is a series that a lot of people think is basically dead already. And it's a series that would really benefit from a fresh voice, I reckon. I think of Chris Rock, this seems like a genuine passion project for him. The idea that he'd been just sitting about knocking up a story in his head for a Saw film, I think is really cool, And he really doesn't need the money. They didn't approach him, he approached them. There already could have just been another Saw 9 coming out anyway. So I reckon he must have had a really good idea. Now, we don't really know much about what this idea is, and like all Saw films, I guess it comes down to the twists and things. I mean, it's got a copycat killer premise, which seems sensible since you can't really drag out the soap opera elements all that much further. But, it's another police procedural film just like all the others. It looks like it's trap heavy like the others. Although, that person on the underground line, that looked amazing.
It looks so cool.
I've been so hyped for this because it's meant to come out the day before my birthday last year. Now it's the day before my birthday this year. So I don't know if the cinema trip will be in order. I don't know if they'll be open here. If they are, it'll be an afternoon screening, very socially distanced. But I absolutely can't wait for this. I think it's going to be amazing.
I think there would be something really nice and poetic about, after a year of not being able to go to the cinema, the first film we go and see is Saw.
I mean, the thing is, with the Saw series, it's probably my favourite franchise. I get as much out of it as I do with Friday the 13th and stuff. But the difference between Saw and Friday the 13th is, I think with the exception of the second, I've seen every single one of these at the cinema. It's sort of thing of experiencing them coming out, the height of the whole sort of torture film craze, and then, seeing the eighth one come out a few years ago, speaking to the producer on it, it was a lot of fun. I've spoken to Darren Lynn Boseman as well in my time with good old horror cult films, and it's just felt like a sort of like a constant, during my adulthood. So, yeah, I really look forward to going back to the cinema and seeing another Saw.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I never saw any of the Saw films in the cinema. I don't even think did we go and see Jigsaw together?
No, we did not. We watched it together on streaming.
Yeah, because I saw the first 3 Saw films as a teenager, like in a sort of with a friend when we were very, very into horror films and would watch, them all for hours and hours and hours. And I would definitely say that Saw films are the ones that have kind of stuck with me the most. Now, since we've been together, I've probably seen most of the Friday the 13th and Halloweens and Nightmare on Elm Street. And possibly because Saw is obviously like a more modern icon. Like, I think, there aren't really any other modern horror films that kind of would be put on the same, kind of pedestal in terms of like how iconic the villain is.
Yeah, I think the only franchise that would come close that's modern would probably be the Conjuring universe. I mean, that's just taking Annabelle as the most iconic character, but I mean, she's not the only villain in that series. Fuck it, she's not even in all the films, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Now, we've talked a wee bit about movies there. Now, let's talk about making movies. Here is me speaking to Justin McConnell, our feature presentation.
Film and telling a story reminds us who we are.
Making movies is beautiful. Raising the money, selling them is horrible.
I wanted to make films since I was very young. So I grew up dreaming of when I might get the big break. I'm not really anybody yet. And what chance do I really have?
If you are entering this business in order to be a rich or famous, you're in the wrong place.
To be successful as a filmmaker, you have to be a little bit insane.
The fact that any movie ever gets made is a miracle.
It's all about money.
You can make a wonderful film and it never gets seen.
I think there's a lot of stories out there that haven't had the voice in the past.
I have to prove myself a lot harder.
I think a lot of filmmakers think it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where you just get the golden ticket and then you're making movies, and that's not what it is.
It's an organic thing, filmmaking, and you can't hold on to your original plan too tightly.
Constant roller coaster, just ups and downs and ups and downs.
I've been making films for almost 30 years, and I still don't know how they get made. By fate.
You're pushing this project and pushing it and pushing it, and you'd give your life or your soul for the thing to happen. You'd sacrifice your firstborn.
You cannot ever stop.
The doors to getting your work seen are wide open now. The ability to make money off your work is what's much more difficult.
We have much more product than it is possible to watch.
Sales world is AFM, Berlinale, and Cannes, and like Cannes is 50% of their global business is made there.
And you make the movie, you take it to the market, you have a little stand.
There's just more stuff at these markets now than there's room for.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
A lost cause is the only one worth finding.
If you're a shoemaker, you make the frickin' shoes. If you're a filmmaker, you dream about the shoes. It's a sad state of affairs, really.
The film business is a hell of a mountain to climb, but I have just as much chance as anybody else. I think.
So Justin, thank you very much for coming on this show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Just want to get started with your surname, McConnell. Is this some Scottish that you have in you?
I have Scottish, Irish, English, and Finnish in me. So I believe on the Scottish side it's MacDonald, and the Irish side it's O'Connell, and somehow those family lines joined at some point in our history. I don't know my full Irish history or my full Scottish history, but that, yes, there's Scottish in me.
Cool. So, with Clapboard Jungle, this documentary was shot across a period of 5 years. How did the focus change as it went on? Like, was this always going to be about capturing your next feature film, going from pre-production to a finished product? Or did you have another narrative in mind before Lifechanger took off?
I didn't even have Lifechanger in mind when I started shooting this. So it wasn't even the seed of an idea in my head at the time. I just figured that I needed a story skeleton of some kind to hang the information on to keep it interesting for more general viewers, because diehard cinema fans and people actually wanting to be filmmakers, I figured they'd already want to watch it because it would have information and interviews with people that they were very interested in. But I knew I needed a story skeleton, and simultaneously I knew I'd be trying to get a bunch of films made at the time. When I started shooting, though, I didn't know what film it would be. I was trying to get Tripped made at the time. I was trying to get The Eternal made at the time. There was a pile of projects, and any one of them could have gone at any point, and then the focus probably would have shifted to that. So really, I just set out to shoot and then let life take me where life took me. And that's basically how that ended up being the story that it is that's just the way life went. I didn't actually try and shape a story until later on when we were actually in post-production, because I wanted it to be honest to what actually happened, as opposed to there are some documentaries that generate and create and embellish and come up with story ideas to kind of like make sure you have your proper 3-act structure and all this sort of thing. I wasn't really going for that. If that happened in the movie, that was natural and part of our editing process to actually, make a story that flows. But we also went forward with this journalistic drive to kind of be as honest as possible with what actually happened and the steps that it took, and only leave out things for time and making sure that it's not repetitive and boring and things like that. But it was very much like I knew early on that if I'm turning a camera on myself and I'm also the one directing the movie, that I run the risk of becoming overly self-aggrandizing or, up my own ass, I guess is a good way to put it. And so I brought in Daryl Shaw early on, and I brought in Kevin Burke just before the edit and through the edit to make sure that it wasn't such a singular focus, that I had like objective viewpoints on the outside of things throughout the whole process. So it became more about, me as a case study, as opposed to here's a movie I made about myself and look at how awesome I am. I wanted it to be very reflective of just who I am for real.
Yeah, because it's good that you said that you've got other people there to kind of keep you in check there. Because when you're telling the story here, how does developing the kind of image, the arc of yourself, compare to the way that you would tell a journey of a fictional filmmaker?
Well, that's really also a question of the difference between a narrative film and a documentary. And in a lot of ways, like a narrative film gets written 3 times. It gets written as the screenplay and the treatment and the original initial idea before it actually goes to camera. And that's like an orchestrated thing. You're trying to write and tell a story that hits all the notes you want it to hit at the right time. And then you go to shoot the movie. It's another form of rewriting because things change on set and you end up with, improv, but it's still using the script as a guideline. And if changes are made on set in major ways to the script, it's usually because you've realized, or the team has realized, okay, this story is actually better told if we make these few easy changes as we're producing. And then it gets written a 3rd time in post-production because as you're editing, you realize, okay, well, what worked on the page doesn't necessarily work on the screen as well as you thought. So, but it's still using that blueprint of the script. It's still using, whatever initial idea still guides the final part of the process. It's just at that point, you're letting go of your marriage to those original ideas. With documentary, especially one like this, you're not necessarily planning it from the start. It's very much an organic way of finding the story as time goes on and taking notes as you go. And then you also have a lot more time for your subconscious to kind of work on what the project is actually going to be at the end of the day. So it's not like something where you're initially setting out to fit it into like one block. And because even a good example is maybe 3 years into production was when I made the decision, okay, it's going to be 2 things. It's going to be this standalone feature film that's more esoteric and personal and emotional, and then it's going to be an 8-episode series that's much more educational and talking head. And I narrated a bit, but it's not about me at all. And that serves 2 completely different types of audiences. So it was kind of like a more of a discovery kind of thing. And then once you actually realize, okay, I've got enough footage, I can start editing this and putting it together, then it's a whole other new thing with documentary, because that's where the story is actually built, is putting all the puzzle pieces together while you're editing. So the most important part of writing for a documentary is the story editing and the post-production phase of things. Whereas with narrative, it's all 3 phases, but really the script and the story is key right from the very beginning. At least in terms of a documentary like this. There are documentaries that are scripted and planned from the very beginning. There's lots of them that are like they're built like a tight machine, and these are the points I want to make. These are the sections I'm going to go out and get interviews, and you plan it like to the nth degree. A lot of movies on film are like that because they're talking about a career of somebody or a nation's like film output, or it's more observational based on topics and like someone's history. So you already have that skeleton to pull from. In this case, none of my life had happened yet, so it's not like I could predict the future. So it's very much discovering it as you go along.
And I guess in that case, you must have had some sort of a small seed that grew into this. So was the original idea, I want to do a documentary about how difficult it is to make movies?
I wanted to make a documentary that was an accurate reflection of how challenging it is to get films made and seen in the current environment for an independent filmmaker, because there really isn't that many documentaries like that. I mean, you get stuff like American Movie, where it's like one person's perspective and of them just trying to break out and finish a movie at all, which is like the backyard sort of level of that. And then you get the higher level of stuff. There's a documentary called Seduced and Abandoned, where Alec Baldwin goes around Cannes and tries to pre-sell a project with a major director who will remain nameless at this point, with him attached. So he's going to bigger players and trying to like get millions of dollars and stuff like this. But there was never really a film for that mid-ground, for the independent filmmaker who's like knocking down the doors themselves or making these, $100,000 to $500,000 movies, or sometimes upwards of $1 million and $2 million. But in that zone where it's like, the movies that flood the streaming services and stuff like that all the time, there's not really much of a guidepost for that sort of thing. So I wanted to make a movie that kind of, I wish existed in, say, the mid 2000s when I was first coming up. Of course, the information would have been a little bit different then, but something that would open a door for new filmmakers or for people interested in the business, to kind of point them in potential directions that they can look into to learn more about how they can get their career going. That was my first initial sort of goal with it. And I knew I wanted to collect a ton of interviews and get the opinions of everybody, because, my perspective is only one of many, many perspectives. But I also knew I needed a skeleton of a story and an emotional core. And I had no money, and I paid for it all out of my own pocket up until like post-production. So essentially what happened was I went, well, I've got no money, but I do want a story arc and a character to follow. I can't afford to live somebody else's life and shadow them as a documentarian for several years, because I've got my own stuff on the go. But since I've already got my own stuff on the go and I'm doing this story anyway, the only natural, practical thing to do is turn the camera on myself. And that's kind of how that all came together.
So were you editing the story as you were going along? Because you had like 300 hours of footage, I saw, right?
Yeah, about 300 hours, roughly.
So, like, what were you doing? What was the process as you were filming it? Like, throughout the course of the years, was Clapboard Jungle being shaped, or was it sort of just bubbling away the back of your mind?
No, I mean, I had cut together sales reels and stuff like that for our Indiegogo campaign, but I wasn't actually editing anything as I went along. But what I was doing was everything I shot was very, very well sorted, and there were notes about it. So, if I shot for a day, the folder name for that day would be pretty clear as to what was shot, so that it was easy to organize for later on. So I could go and just look at, several hundred folders of footage and audio and interviews. So I kind of knew that like a grid, you could now see all the puzzle pieces listed out, and then you could start organizing it that way. And then when post-production actually started, the first phase before Kevin Burke came on as an editor, I had Elitza Bacco, who is in Lifechanger. She's the first form of Drew in Lifechanger. She's an associate editor or assistant editor on the project. She sat down and I created like 35 subject-based timelines, pre-selling a film or whatever, crowdfunding, whatever. And then her job was to go through 120 interviews and sort every answer to every question into one of the 35 or 40 timelines, so that we had every answer also sort of organized. And then Kevin came on board, and we started working on an assembly edit of getting the story down, and then figuring out where we could, by going to these like subject-based timelines, where we could pull from to get a relevant piece of information to what was going on in the story. So it was very much like through the actual production, I was just keeping good notes. I wasn't actually piecing it together necessarily, except for subconsciously or in my head or just like thinking about it. It wasn't really until post-production that it really started coming together.
And you mentioned earlier this sort of the importance of having an emotional arc during this. Now, something that I really like about this documentary is we're learning about your entire adult life as a filmmaker here. What I'm wondering is, by the end of it, with the sort of growth that we see in yourself as a person throughout, if Justin now met Justin at the start of your journey, what do you reckon is the key message that you give to him?
Oh, wow. I haven't had that question yet. I mean, the cliche thing to say is it's going to get better, but like that's a problematic thing to say too, because it's not like my life was that bad back. I mean, what am I saying? It wasn't great. I mean, I was probably at one of the lowest points in my life, and I've recently lost my best friend who died, and I was, imbibing some substances and living pretty hard, and making this doc kind of help pull myself out of that to some degree. Because I was just in a phase of depression for the year leading up to when I made this doc after Kevin passed away. So yeah, obviously, I would say the cliche thing of like, just keep at it. This is going to pay off down the line. Cause I had no idea back then. I was just making something because I was like, what could I do with no money? And I was like this, and then I guess it just got out of control. But I would probably say, let go of your ego a little bit and realize you don't know anywhere near the level you think you do, but you're going to learn a lot more. And as long as you're open to learning and open to criticism and open to rolling with some punches, you'll have a better outlook on life in a lot of ways. And so I guess it would be more of a reality check moment of just like, get over yourself. Shit will get better if you let it get better. And you put in the effort, because that was the big one, is like, I was like 285 pounds at the end of 2013. And from that point to the end of 2015, I dropped to 169 pounds working out. And while I was doing that, I was watching every bit of, like, while I worked out, I would watch every bit of like behind the scenes material I possibly could, tried to train my brain at the same time as my body. And then I had already been to a few film markets before that point, but my first time going to con and all this stuff, which is obviously in the movie, but just branching out and trying to like hit the problem head on was a big step that I didn't know I had in me. And I do feel like part of the reason I worked so hard on that was it was the documentary partially. It was like, well, if I'm going to do this doc, I might as well put in the effort it takes to actually make something happen. So it was almost like, I knew I wanted to get this done. I knew I wanted to get other stuff done. So I just kind of just buckled down and in a way, having these projects helped push me forward, I guess. So I would definitely say to myself, let go of the ego a bit. Forgive yourself a little bit for, having a down period of your life and just like buckle down and push forward and do what you can to get out of it. Probably. I think that sounds like great advice to all our listeners out there for if you're wondering if they've got a film in them. I also really enjoyed the sort of Rocky montages of you working out as you were going through the there was more of that got cut out, and it's weird because I think I cut out the part that contextualized why that was in the movie. So I feel like I've taken some flack over the fact that wait, why is there I think that there's a total of maybe 30 to 40 seconds of me working out in the entire 98-minute movie, but I've definitely taken some flack about well this isn't a tight edit because he put shots of himself working out in it, but there's a subtextual reason it's in there. I'm trying to physically improve myself while I mentally improve myself while I learn. And there was like a self-interview chunk that's in the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray, the Arrow Blu-ray, where that's contextualized, but I took that out because it was just like, okay, nobody gives a shit. I figured people would pick up on it like subtly, but that hasn't been the case in some places. It was very much a way that I was watching it. When I was watching it last night, as someone who throughout COVID has struggled with two things: self-discipline at work and also weight. I went, I see what he's doing here. And this focus on learning throughout. You thought, obviously, I guess you say at the beginning that you really like working with actors that you admire. And something I was wondering about is if you've had any particular people that really stand out as colleagues that you've learned a lot from during collaboration. Oh, you mean in general, not just actors? Like anybody? Oh, yeah, in general, sorry. Oh yeah, I mean the reality of it is that people don't make it in this business on their own, and I've been afforded opportunities because of many people throughout my life. Going far back to high school and friends that would help me make movies in high school for no money because it was high school and they just wanted to do it. Through to college, teachers I had at Trebas Institute when I was like taking post-production classes there. But I owe. Straight out of Trebas, one of my first jobs was I was cutting commercials for record labels through a company that basically specialized in providing, like, you'd take the music video, cut it to a 30-second commercial, put the pack shot on it, and that would be on TV selling like Seal's album or Billy Talent's album or whatever. So I was hired on this company and they took a chance on me because I had very little experience at the time, and this guy Tony DiPasquale hired me, and this guy who I would consider one of my mentors, Carlo Basiloni, hired me into this editing company, and that kind of put me on the path I'm on now of running my own post-production company. And without doing that, I probably wouldn't be afloat right now. That company and that drive to sort of service, like to provide clients with services and at least stay in the business in that way, so I'm not working day jobs. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but it allowed me to continue to gain more contacts in the business and learn how to provide high level services to the film business, so that also helps my directing career because I understand the post-production process and things like that. Like those guys taking a chance on me and giving me that job for 2 to 3 years, and then me jumping to like Giacomo Moncada's business and doing sort of similar editing stuff. All that was early chances, bands that gave me a chance by letting me direct music videos for them when I'd never directed music videos, and Much Music for the same. Like you could keep thanking people all the way through, but lately, like over the past few years or a decade or so, Kevin Hutchinson is a big one I have to thank. He's no longer with us, but like we spent a decade writing together and making things and stuff like that, and we did 5 scripts together. We made a feature film. We made several shorts. It was, he's a big part of the reason. I owe him tons. But after that, Avi Fettergreen, my co-producer on Lifechanger and executive producer on this, and I work with this company IndieCan all the time. We talk every day, and I'm constantly working with him. He's made me a significantly more knowledgeable person in this business than I was before I met him. And Serena Whitney, my co-writer on Do You See What I See and Mark of Cain, I owe a lot to because she's the second writing partner I've had, but the first one who I worry is the wrong word, but I think might be a better writer than I am. So it helps make me be a better writer to work with her, kind of thing. I would say that. I don't know that for sure, but it's the feeling I get. It's like, she's very, very talented, and working with somebody who's on your level or above your level makes you step up, So I owe her a lot for the years of work we put into Mark of Cain and Do You See What I See and other stuff. But like the reality of it is I'd be listing people all day long, and I have to apologize to anybody who I didn't mention here because do you have 10 hours? Because I think the point is that it really takes a village in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. People have to take chances on you, and even my parents, right? Like I've self-financed the majority of my stuff through my post-production company, but early on in my career, I have borrowed money from them that I've then paid back because where else was I going to get it? Nobody's taking a chance on a 20-something-year-old kid. So, to make smaller stuff that I've then sold that returned money to them, I had to. There was I had no other way around it. And I fully understand there are people who may not have the privilege of being able to turn to any kind of support structure. And that is difficult, very difficult. But I would say that it's a lot easier now than it would have been 15 years ago to make a movie that looks of high quality with the technology that's available for way cheaper now.
I saw that Twitter debate where that got involved about if you can make a movie on a mobile phone, I believe.
Yeah, well, you can. No matter what that guy says, you can make a movie on a mobile phone. It's all the support structures around making a movie on a mobile phone, getting it sold, getting it seen, finishing it in a professional enough way that distributors can actually buy it. All that stuff isn't cheap. like no matter what. But you can technically take a mobile phone, go out and shoot something, whether it's a feature film or a short film or a TikTok video or whatever. You can get noticed using your mobile phone camera. You can. I mean, you don't. Obviously, things like Tangerine and Unsane and stuff like that were shot with, you know, extension rigs and specialty lenses on the mobile phone and stuff like that to make it look better. But that doesn't mean you can't. There's a movie Arrow's got coming out called Threshold, where it was just, I haven't seen it yet, but the production story, from what I understand, is it was just a few people in a car with a couple of iPhones, and, you know, Arrow's putting it out. Oh, wow. You know, it's apparently a very good horror film. You can do this for next to no money. Do I recommend that being your path? No. If you can go out and try and raise financing, absolutely do it. My point in saying this is that it's hard to get anyone to give you money or let you make a film until you've made a film or something that proves what you can do. So, and it is within your means now to make those things. And it may not necessarily mean a feature film. It may be like, you know, a 5-minute video that, like, look at Lights Out. You know, that's a 1-minute short film with a great scare in it that launched a career of a major director. I'm telling you, that movie Lights Out, with some relatively cheap software or open source software, the right idea, the right know-how, and an iPhone, you can make your own movie or short film similar enough to Lights Out that could get you noticed. Like, it doesn't. I think it's very gatekeepy to say you can't do that, because despite the fact that I do have a little bit of money because I run this post-production company that brings in clients, it wasn't like that in my 20s. I was scrounging in the couch for cushions to buy pasta so that I can make enough pasta for 4 or 5 days so that I can afford to live off like $5 for a few days for food. This was part of my history. You know, it's not like I started out being somewhat. I don't even think I am financially comfortable, at least in terms of the scope of what generally people have in, you know, as a support system when they're making movies in Hollywood, especially. Like, usually they come from family money, or their father's a famous director, or that stuff does absolutely happen. I'm just saying that people are going to be propping you up, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. They're like, if somebody takes a chance on you because they believe in you, you shouldn't feel guilty because somebody else in life didn't get the same chance necessarily. And I know that sounds weird, and that sounds potentially necessary. Like, I don't want this to phrase that in the wrong way, because I'm sensitive to the idea that there are people that absolutely do not have access, and there are definitely systemic problems that prevent people from getting those open doors, or those doors to open for them. But I will say that compared to like 5-10 years ago, those doors are more open than ever before. So there is a sort of a meet in the middle kind of thing. You can like say that it's this, that everything's holding you back, which, you know, in some ways the system may be, but you also have to kind of work to meet it too. It's like, I just don't want to be misunderstood in this part, because it's such a sensitive topic right now, especially on Twitter, that I don't want. Like, I fully sympathize with somebody who believes that they've just been stepped on their entire career. But you got to understand that's thousands of people probably that feel that way. And I felt that way in my past plenty of time. And it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be like that forever for you.
I really like the way, actually, that in the documentary you handle this point about opportunities. And about sort of structural inequalities within the industry. You know, like, as you acknowledge the problems that you've had making this, but then you also point out that you're, statistically speaking, part of a demographic that's most likely to be able to manage this as well.
Yeah, statistically speaking, I am, for sure. But on an individual level, it's not like, you know,
absolutely.
I don't think I necessarily fit into that statistic, you know. But that being said, you know, that could be my own fault. I don't really necessarily know, because you have to win people over with your work and with your personality and with just who you are. They have to trust that you're going to deliver a movie of value, and that you're going to deliver on just being a good personality to work around. You know, there's a lot of things that hold people back beyond just the system. And And but that being said, the system definitely holds people back at times.
There was one bit that I got a lot of secondhand anxiety watching, right? And that's a bit where I'd never heard of these movie markets until I'd seen this. If anyone listening has never heard of these either, they're kind of like sort of like speed dating for movies, essentially. You know,
I would call it more like a flea market or a swap meet.
What sort of emotions are you experiencing in one of those? Because it looked incredibly intimidating.
It's intimidating when you first go until you realize that even though you're a tiny fish in a big pond, the pond is fucking huge. I hope I can swear. So what that means is that, you know, if you get a door slammed in your face or a meeting doesn't go well, there's 100 others you can take, or 200 others that you can take. You just got to figure out a way to get to that person enough that they'll give you that 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour or however much of their day they're willing to sit and listen to you or talk with you or get to know you, and realize that it's never about the one meeting. It's always about planting the seeds for the future. So it is possible you have a great meeting that goes so incredibly well, you get a project out of it at one of these markets. By markets, I'm talking about like the Marché du Film in Cannes, the European film market in Berlin, Film Art in Hong Kong, the American film market in LA. There's a long list of them. Those are the top ones generally, though, give or take. There's others, Frontiers through Fantasia. Frontiers is a little different than the other markets because it's not a bunch of booths. It's a curated market. So your projects need to be selected as a showcase project to be an official project to take meetings. But you can still sign up for Frontiers and or you could in the past. I don't know what it's going to be like in the future after COVID, but you can sign up for it, buy a badge, and still arrange your own meetings through the attendees because you get everybody's contact info. But anyway, if you realize that it's not necessarily about getting your goal in the meeting, but making sure that the people you're meeting with understand you're there, you're not going away, you're reliable, and they think about you for future stuff. That's more important, I think, and it dispels some of the anxiety because you stop going into meetings going, oh, I hope this one works. I hope I get the project off the ground. And you start going into meetings like, I'm going to meet somebody cool or not, and they're going to remember me in the future or not. But at least I'm putting in the work to make sure that I'm a known quantity to the people that actually finance or buy films. Because if you are in your apartment somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you do have a chance of getting noticed if you make something that gets noticed, but they're not going to know you from Adam if you're just blindly, coldly emailing people. It's not even the right way to do things. But if you're in their face is the wrong way to put it. If you're, having a drink with them at a party, or you're, sitting down and discussing film with them at their booth, surrounded by films that they've made that you already liked and watched, and you can talk about their product. And I find something really helpful for me. I don't just talk about the films I want to make. I go, well, I also run a post-production company and I offer these services. And I'm also a festival programmer. So if any of your films need to play Toronto After Dark, just send me screeners and I'll take a look and we'll see if they fit our programming committee. You're able to sort of like give as well as take in these meetings. I've found that the more you can offer them, or the more useful you can be to somebody, the better the meeting can go. And that may not mean your project gets made, but it may mean that maybe 3 years down the line or a little bit down the line or whenever, you're doing business with them in some other way, or you're making a different movie with them down the line because they remember you, because they know who you are. They know you're actually doing things. You've proven yourself in some way, shape, or form. You still have to have the work to back yourself up, though, to some degree. Like, I wouldn't go to one of these markets if I've never made a film and all I've done is written just a script and I'm just trying to get a script made. Like, maybe go to AFM to see what it's like to just walk the floors and understand. It's a crash course. My first AFM was 2009, right after I'd finished the first script for The Eternal, and the short film had played a bunch of festivals in 2008. So I went to AFM my first time in 2009, and it was just like a culture shock. It was like, oh, thousands of movies get made a year, and I see maybe 100 of them. Maybe a little more than that, probably more than that. But let's say I see X number of movies, but thousands got made a year. What happens to all these other movies? You realize, okay, a lot of them aren't good enough to sell to anywhere. So they just disappear. So somebody's investment disappears. Okay, I have to make sure that I make stuff that doesn't disappear. And then that sort of culture, that sort of like shock to the system is worth it for starting filmmakers. But it's very hard to get meetings if you've never done anything. So you got to do something. You got to make something that catches the eye. It doesn't matter really what it is. It's just got to be something cool and interesting.
When I was ranking the top movies of last year, so your one ended up being the very top of my list last year for Horror Cult Films #1. And one of the things that really...
Wait, which film? Are we talking
Clapboard Jungle.
Okay, all right, sure.
Yep. Yeah, you topped our list last year, or my personal list. There's two of us made list. The other person hadn't seen the film, so maybe it would have topped theirs too. But one of the things that really spoke to me about it was just seeing behind the curtain here. So you're saying, okay, well, as a reviewer, when I see stuff, I'm sure, like many other reviewers, I'm quite prone to making bitchy comments about the films I'm watching, right? But something that really stuck with me from this, there's two images. There's you hand wrapping your Blu-rays really stuck with me as this is like the side that you don't normally see of people working on films, getting films out there.
Yep.
And the other was, I think it's the 2015 part when you're in Cannes, and you've got the people who made Sky Sharks there. Now, with Sky Sharks, so that showed at Fright Fest the same year that yours did, which same year as Clapboard Jungle did, which underlined to me that this project took at least 5 years because it was Fright Fest 2020. It
took a little longer, but yeah. Yep.
And I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, so they've obviously worked hard on this movie. I gave this film a 2-star review a couple of days ago, and I felt like a total dick. Now, I look back at my review and thought, well, I wasn't mean about it. I was constructive, which is important. But it really made me sort of appreciate that I'm not saying bad films don't get made. They do, but it's really stuck with me just how much work actually goes into this. I didn't know about this circuit of people touring the world trying to, securing these meetings. I never really thought of the idea that even a film that I didn't like was a passion project for two people who made it, And and honestly, I found the whole thing really moving, because we also have you touring the world. You're going to you're going to all your screenings. A huge one in South Korea towards the end, right? And imagine moments like this makes it all seem worthwhile, right?
It does, but you also have to reality check yourself afterward and go, holy shit, I got lucky. And I'm in South Korea right now in this giant audience of 20,000 people, and I've just walked the red carpet right after Lars von Trier or something like that. And I'm on the same wall with these people. And it's like, but then you got to go, I'm still a fucking chump, I'm still really nobody. I mean, I had a great time at that festival, and all those festivals I traveled to. I did 37 flights in a year, traveling with Lifechanger, to the point where I've started to hate flying, even though I love traveling. I guess I got my wish with, how much I've been able to not fly the last year and a bit with the pandemic. But
you got to take a mini victory where you find it.
But you can get a swelled head if you think about oh wow, I made this movie and now they've flown me to South Korea and they're paying for my hotel and all my food, because there's all these with a bigger festival, there's a bunch of perks, which is a cool little bonus. But you can't make the art to get the perks. It's like the idea of all the kids who wanted to be in metal and rock bands because of the fallacy that is, just being in a band will get you the girls and the coke and the limousines and stuff like that. It's not really the truth. And although these bonuses happen, I still remember this is a funny story, and I'm hoping Telefilm doesn't hear this, but the year we played Busan, Telefilm, which is the funding body for Canada, didn't have any Telefilm-funded films in the festival, but we applied to that festival through Telefilm. So every Canadian film in the festival that year were not funded by Telefilm, but they were supported by Telefilm in that they're the ones who got us into the festival. So we ended up at this really beautiful dinner in South Korea in Busan with people from the embassy and all these we were guests of honor for Canada kind of thing. And the same thing happened at Fright Fest in 2018. We got a photo taken for the Telefilm kind of thing, but none of us had Telefilm funding. None of us had the government money, but they're like, look what Telefilm is doing, which I found just super amusing that we go to these places and we're supported by these film organizations, but they didn't actually have anything to do with making our films. Anyway, that was a side trip. But the point is that, you can absolutely see all that sort of like the fruits of your labor and the side effects of whatever, success your film might have. But you got to live in those moments and go, that may never happen again, and I got to get back to work.
Speaking of which, when films are finally finished a bunch of them, a load of them yourself, and we're just talking about one that's about to get what I like to think of as the ultimate edition over here. Mm-hmm. Does your relationship with your film change over time? Because I'm thinking about, you've got some of them on one hand, like The Eternal and The Mark of Cain, that you've been wanting to make for like literally years here, and then you've got movies that you also released years ago. And I guess I'm just wondering, like how is it when you see you see your own film in a shop or something, or can you watch these objectively?
I think it's always cool to see the stuff you worked on out in the world, and getting new legs and stuff. Like a good example is, I don't know when this podcast is going up, but on April 1st, Arrow on Arrow Player, the streaming app, or leading up to the release of Clapboard Jungle on the 19th on Arrow, and all the bonus material. Starting on April 1st, they're releasing a bunch of my old stuff. So like my previous documentary, one of my previous documentaries, Skull World, launches on Arrow Channel on April 1st. And then a bunch of my shorts gradually leading up to April 19th. So there will be 10 short films from me and Skull World and Clapboard Jungle and all the extras eventually by April 19th. So Skull World's a movie that didn't really catch on. I mean, it was another documentary produced like this, kind of just out of my pocket. I always thought, I really liked the movie. I think it turned out pretty good. It's a weird cult oddity documentary that, it was out on Blu-ray and DVD. It got pretty good reviews. It was out there. It was on Prime for a while, but now it's 8 years since it's been made, and it's being launched on a new platform with brand new eyes and a pretty good sizable following of people who actually subscribe to the platform. I'm curious to see how it does. Just because you never know. You never know. It might catch on again. The right person might see it and be like, where the hell was this for 8 years? I don't know. So I do like the idea that films get rediscovered, or that you can see, somebody you met from Japan or something, text you a photo of like one of them, a movie made 11 years ago sitting in a DVD store in Japan. All that stuff is it's very cool. But again, the same as the travel and everything else, it's like, oh, that's a nice feeling. I've left some kind of stamp on the world in some way with whatever I've created. That's cool. But it really just adds up to a degree of satisfaction knowing your work is out there. But the reality that, it's basically trivia at the end of the day. Like for the like-minded or for the cinephiles and for stuff like that, it's just more trivia that sits in their head that hopefully they can answer a question later in their life if it ever comes up. It's never going to amount to much more than that, except to the people who've watched it and loved it, and it lives on as something more special to them. In terms of watching my older work, I have trouble with that for some of the stuff, because all you see as a filmmaker is the mistakes you made and how you would improve things. And that includes Clapboard Jungle. That includes like new stuff I've done. It's you can really enjoy the process as you're making it, and you're happy with it when it's done, or as happy as you can be, because you have to abandon a film. You never finish a film, because as soon as you lock picture, 3 weeks later you go, oh fuck, I should have done that. It's that kind of thing. Always happens for any artist worth their salt. I think is always self-analyzing.
That was something I was wondering about. When a script, when does it? Because the scripts are obviously finished before or abandoned before the film gets made. But like, when does a script feel like ready? Like, is there a point where you just say, all right, well, I don't want to tinker with it any further?
Well, the funny thing about scripts is that they don't get abandoned or stopped once the film starts getting made, because what ends up happening is you go into your rehearsals and you go into working with the actors, and you start into production, and everybody has ideas and notes, and the people paying for the movie have ideas and notes, and the dailies start coming back and people start watching them, and then you have more notes, and you have more. There's always outside influences on the script when you're actually in production or leading into production or rehearsing or whatever. You might have written something on the page one way, but then in rehearsal it just doesn't sound right, so you workshop it into something else. Like the script is not done until the picture is technically locked in some ways, but I think personally, I feel a script is ready when like there's no one answer to this, but you just feel it in your gut when you're like, this is it, this is the one, and then it's still not done. like because then other people have to come in and weigh in on it, right? I've got scripts that I've been rewriting for a decade, at this point, just because like a couple of years will go by and you'll go, I'm going to give that another read because I still want to make this movie. I wonder what I'll see in it now. And you've had 2 more years of life experience and you go, okay, no, I can see how this can be improved. So in a way, time almost helps the work, I think, because especially if you've got people reading it gradually over the years or over time or however long it takes to get to the screen, you've got more feedback and you've got, script readers or whatever, things people can see in it that you didn't necessarily see. I think in a way it's like cooking, writing a script, in that you put the ingredients together and it's in the execution of how you create something that makes it taste good or not. But certain things like slow cooking, making chili or something like that, the more time you put into it, this metaphor is losing, it's going right off the rail. The point is that I do think that a script is always being refined right up until until you basically call a wrap on the shoot. And then even in post, it can be refined even further. But as a writer, the moment you feel like this is the movie I want to see in my head, that's when the script is done. But know that it's not really done then. It's just when you feel satisfied enough to start showing it to people.
So when you're writing them, or when you're redrafting, I guess, are you thinking of what the realistic budget's going to be while you're doing it, or do you kind of just let your imagination goes where it goes and think if I need to find a cost-effective way of doing that, I'll rewrite it later?
Depends on the project. Something bigger like Mark of Cain or The Eternal, I was thinking about the budget, but not in a way where I'm like, oh, I'm only going to have like 150 grand. I need to pull this off I need to scrape by to get this one. Those are bigger movies. So it's more just like, okay, I sort of write to a budget and I sort of don't. I've got this movie Tracer where I just let my brain go wild, and it's it could cost $5 million. It could cost $50 million. It doesn't, I don't know. And that's the kind of project where I just write, and then the realities of the production will cause a rewrite to happen one way or another. But other things that I've written specifically to a budget, The Collapsed is a really good example of a movie that I made, my second narrative feature, but the first one to get real distribution. That was a movie I made where I knew I had $40,000 to shoot the movie, not finish it, but shoot it and get it to a rough cut stage. I knew that was the exact amount of money I had. So I wrote the entire script around exactly what I knew I could pull off, what everything would cost, down to the point where it's like, well, I've got access to a family hunting camp, and I know I can rent a gas station for a day in a small town for X amount of dollars, and I know how much it costs to rent the subway platform below Bay Street Station that they shot Max Payne in. So let's write those into the script. It was reverse engineered completely, and it probably shows. I mean, that is it's not a particularly strong script. We wrote it way too fast in 6 weeks, and we were shooting a month after that. And it was a lesson learned where it's like, you need to take more time with the script. You need to take more time with rehearsal and casting and all these different things. But that's part of it too. It's all a learning process. Lifechanger, I wrote initially to be something that I could shoot in 5 short films over a series of weekends, so that I could mount a production of a short film, then I'd have the chunk of the movie, and then I mount another production of a short film, then I'd have another chunk of the movie. And then gradually that ended up being a single film and a single film shoot. So I was able to write it to be a bit more flexible and a bit bigger, but it was still written knowing that I probably wasn't going to have more than $1 million to make it. And then I had way less than that even. But so it really depends on the project. And depends on my reason for writing, because sometimes I write just to write, and sometimes I write going, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this made. So, or I'm going to get it made in a certain way. So I reverse engineer it so that I know it's going to cost. I know what it's going to cost. So I can come into the pitch meeting and go, this is the budget I need. I know it's going to cost this, and I can show my work.
So with The Eternal, and actually Mark of Cain, I believe, was going to go into production before COVID, right?
It was supposed to shoot May last year, but we had to put it on the shelf, and now we're trying at this point to get it going again for this year in Australia, because Australia is virtually COVID free. So we already had an Australian project, so why not? We do have our money at the table still. We do have the same partners that were there from last year at the table, and we're in the middle of casting at the moment. But yeah, that was kind of shitty because we were out to a pretty big actor. So we were taking big swings. We went out to Wesley Snipes. We went out to Jim Carrey. They passed. We were out to a third actor who we're still talking to right now. So I'm not mentioning who it is. I'll talk about who passed on it. we have everybody at the table, and last year we did too, and we were like, okay, we're finally going to be making this, and then COVID hit, and the world fell apart, and it was like, oh crap. I hope the publishers of the book let us renew the option next year under the excuse that it's not even an excuse, under the reality that we just couldn't shoot it. The world was under a pandemic kind of thing. Even though movies did get made, this particular movie would not work as a pandemic production, I don't think.
It looks like a really good idea. I tried buying the book last night when I was watching the movie. I was watching Clapboard Jungle. I was going, he makes this sound amazing. Unfortunately, it's not available in the UK any longer.
It isn't. You should be able to.
Second-hand shop will have it.
I think you can get it second-hand through Amazon. I'm pretty sure there's copies out there. And it was republished in 2014 or 2015 I look for Michael Prescott Kane as opposed to Douglas Borton Kane. It's the same book, but he's got his real name is Douglas Borton. Then he became Brian Harper, and then he became Michael Prescott. It's all the same guy.
That may well be where my error came in.
Yeah. So if you're looking for Michael Prescott Kane, that's the same book.
With the Eternal, is that kind of like your sort of Moby Dick at the moment? Like, is it like the Great White that will hopefully be caught someday?
I've learned to, I hope so, because I really love that script. I think it's super fun, and it's influenced by so many things that I grew up loving, while being its own thing. At the time I was writing it, I was heavily into like watching Sons of Anarchy and Boardwalk Empire, and it's very much a mob movie. Like, it's not Innocent Blood. Like, automatically you jump to vampires and the mob, and you think of Innocent Blood, but that's not what this film is. This film is like warring gang factions who go to war because a vampire jumps in the middle of them and plays them off each other, Yojimbo style. So it's a really fun, I think it's a really fun script. I'd love to make it, but I've stopped attaching myself emotionally to my work in a way that anything is a passion project or a Moby Dick. I just want to get the next one made, whatever the next one is generally the one that people are most interested in the meeting. And that's why I've got multiple projects at once, because everybody has different tastes. It's not like I'm trying to cater to a wide menu. It's still projects that I want to make, but at least if somebody says, hey, do you have a contained supernatural thriller of some kind that we've got X amount of money, I can go, maybe, or something like that. But the point being is, I'd love to get the Eternal made. I think that'd be especially because of the casts I had attached to it. I think it would be just a really fun, balls to the wall, ultra-violent thriller, horror, action comedy. I don't know. It's a very strange script.
Is it kind of always thrillers and horrors that you're leaning towards? I saw you did one that's only one shot long.
Oh yeah, that's Broken Mile. That's a drama. Although I built it like a thriller because I figured people would get bored as fuck if it didn't have momentum to some degree. That one's called Broken Mile. I'll put it this way. I'm a monster kid at heart. I love horror and thriller and action and genre stuff, sci-fi and all that. So the majority of the stuff I've written is in that genre, but that doesn't mean it's the only stories in me. It just means that I'll be coming back to those stories fairly regularly. I also think that genre film gives you the latitude to tell really interesting stories without being tethered to a reality in necessarily, or you can establish the rules of a universe that don't match the rules of our universe, and that allows you the ability to explore bigger ideas beyond what, cosmic horror allows you to explore existentialism in a way that you may not necessarily get out of a slow-moving drama.
And also the way I guess you can get your series themes in. Because I remember I was frustrated of the bit where they're talking about the rules of Lifechanger, and they're going, but I don't know if people would understand the rules. And you're like, people will be interested if that's why they'll understand the rules. But I saw that you mentioned that, it wasn't necessarily the original intention. There's a kind of a bit of a Me Too aspect to Lifechanger.
Well, originally, like the first draft I wrote didn't have that. But I wrote that draft in 2015, I think. So the initial drafts didn't really have that angle, but it became such a hot button topic, and I started doing a bunch of reading, and I started doing self-reflection of my own past and my own relationships and how I approach dating and women, and the problematic aspects of that, and like the things, the toxicity that gets ingrained in you growing up as a kid through the 80s and 90s, and like how much of your romantic knowledge comes from like the normality of, the stalker tropes and specific, the concept of, if you got to pursue that girl, don't take no for an answer. If you're meant to be together, like that sort of toxic shit. I was reading about that and just thinking about it and it sort of infected into my mind as I was rewriting, to the point where I went, oh no, I could say something here to some degree, but I did not want it to be a message film that way. It was very much just, I wanted that subtext there because it helped shape the character of Drew and who he was and how, Drew technically is a sexless character. He's been living as both men and women throughout a 70-year period. So although he was born as a boy, he's both. Like he's neither. He has both worldviews. So I wanted to help flesh his character out a little deeper and a little better by showing how toxic his actual worldview is because of his upbringing and because of his outlook on life. It was also a comment on how someone can get radicalized just by not being given enough of the information necessary to navigate who they are and how they fit into the world and that sort of thing. So it was a lot of things, and I think a part of it was just I was spending so much time on the internet and in other ways, just learning and reading and trying to better myself. And as I was doing that, it influenced the writing of the script, or the rewriting of the script, rather. It was simple things like, I like one of the earliest drafts of Lifechanger, the dental hygienist character he takes over was an escort in an early draft. And then it sort of hit me like, no, let's actually give her agency. Let's not make it just like, and not that sex work isn't work or any of that stuff, but it was so tropey that I wanted to break out of that and make something different. But I'm also a big believer in even though the movie has an inner narration, I didn't want to just like throw all those messages in people's faces and be like, this is what the movie's about. I wanted it to be very much something that people either pick up on or they don't. And that's where that came from.
It's something that always slightly frustrates me about parts of the horror community. I remember when the remake of Black Christmas was coming out, people were saying, but it's too political, this film. They're going, hold on. The Invisible Man has very similar themes to Black Christmas. It happens to, I think, to be a better film than Black Christmas remake, but the point being, it wasn't the presence of the message itself, it was that the message is better integrated with the story.
It's about execution, right? I have a friend who's a writer who's hilarious. I find him really funny. And and I'm not talking about specifically any movie here. I'm not going to even comment on the perceived quality of either of those films. They did what they did, and they were successful as they were successful. And at delivering those kind of messages, I'm not going to get into that. But he likes to use the phrase, they're trapped in a metaphor. So the idea that it's not about the story with some films when they want to get a message across, the actual metaphor they're trying to get across is the thing that's driving the story as opposed to the characters. And I do feel that's a trap people can fall into sometimes.
As a filmmaker, when you watch films, are you able to fully switch off when you're watching movies, or is part of you thinking, I'd have done that?
No, I mean, I don't think anybody who works in the business that they're like, I had sometimes I can fully switch off. Sometimes I can watch a film and just enjoy it as a full experience. Most of the time that's theatrically, when I'm actually absorbed in like a really good film. That's the other thing. If the film's great, I'm not necessarily tearing it apart on the first watch or trying to break down how they did something. My mind will go there for sure, but I'm usually trying to absorb the actual experience itself, because I'm a film fan first, I think, in a lot of ways. Like I'm a cinephile first in a lot of ways, but you can't resist breaking things down or analyzing things, and I don't think that diminishes my enjoyment of a film. But my girlfriend criticizes me for this sometimes too. It does mean that if I don't like the film, I'm pretty quick to jump to why, if that makes sense. So like I can usually contextualize why something's not working for me pretty clearly. And I think she gets mad at me sometimes because it diminishes her enjoyment of something. And I apologize now, Ashley, for that. I don't mean to necessarily. all the time. But yes, that's definitely been an issue for me in the past. But most of the time, especially if I'm watching something to turn my brain off after a whole bunch of work and I just want to escape into a movie, I'm not going to overanalyze that too much. And I watch a lot of what people would consider to be trash as well, just to I'm an avid Vinegar Syndrome collector, and I watch, stuff on Prime and Tubi and stuff like that because I like obscure random bullshit. And like Laser Blast, I have to give big respect to for who run by Peter Klopowski and Justin Decloux in Toronto for unearthing a lot of this stuff and putting them in the context and the audience that would actually appreciate it. That kind of stuff, it is pointless to tear apart a movie like that because they're such singular experiences that are enjoyable for some unquantifiable reason. And to try and understand how you'd make something better would ruin that experience.
What was the last really good film or movie that you watched?
Fuck. I've watched tons of stuff over the last little while. The Devils. I watched Ken Russell's The Devils for the first time a few weeks ago, and I thought it was just transcendently awesome. I watched the Arrow Blu-ray, the Con cut of Southland Tales last night. And that was a movie I did not identify with and I did not warm to when it first came out because I was younger and I think I was expecting another Donnie Darko, and it wasn't Donnie Darko. But I watched that last night, and while I don't think it's like this incredible film, I will say it was absolutely enthralling and fascinating to watch. It really, oftentimes when I'm watching a movie, especially at home, it's hard for me to put my phone down all the time. It's hard for me to just you go over their phone and just zero in on this because I'm always got clients emailing me or people messaging me or calling or texting. It's hard to focus. But that's a movie where I was I haven't talked to anybody in an hour and 10 minutes. I'm literally just zeroed in on this. And I'm not saying it's even a particularly good movie, but it's really original and really really singular. And I could be listing stuff forever because I watch so many films. But stuff that really, really stood out to me as great. Dawn of the Dead, the original Romero Dawn of the Dead. I rewatched all of Romero's Dead films over the past couple months, but Dawn of the Dead's one that I've seen so many times, but it was like watching it with new eyes through that 4K set and realizing just how fucking good that movie is. This is one of those questions I can answer forever, and I always get uncomfortable with those questions.
It must have been great meeting Romero for the film.
Yeah, he's an incredibly nice guy, and I interviewed him once, and then I shot that interview between him and Del Toro that's on his box set, and then interviewed Del Toro at his place right afterwards. And then later that day, he ordered us sushi, and we drank Chivas Regal and just talked about the Oscar picks for the year and film, and nothing about his stuff. And I thought that was he was very down to earth, very, very nice fella, and I'm very sad he's gone.
I could just ask you one very last question. You mentioned at the beginning you were saying that your post-production company, your initial break, it was doing post-production and adverts, right?
Yep.
Do you remember the very first advert that you did post-production? I wondered what it was for.
It was a Simple Plan album. I vaguely have the sound of the song in my head. It's the song that goes, "I'm trying to forget you, blah, 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 blah." Anyway, it was an ad for that, whatever that album was. I can't remember right now. So early 2000s pop punk shit. I don't remember. I think that was the first ad I did. I think so. That might have been at least in the first 5. It was either that or a Missy Elliott commercial.
When that came on telly at the time, was that was it a similar feeling to being at movie premieres later on?
Yeah. Well, anytime you make a inroad into getting where you want to be, it's the same feeling. Whether it's going to South Korea or the first time you see a music video you directed on TV, it's the same idea, right? I still think one of the funniest moments in my early 2000s that I still reflect on is I was working at this company making these commercials, and I guess I got typecasted. I'm a little heavier or whatever, and I look like a slob or whatever. I don't know, when I in the early 2000s, and they were trying to figure out who was going to be in the commercial for. Canada has this series from Much Music called Big Shiny Tunes, and they make they're like compilation albums of like the hits from the year. So they were doing the commercial for Big Shiny Tunes 8 through this company I was working for. And I guess they were like, that guy looks like he'd be eating a burger. So I was like one of the two leads of two versions of this Big Shiny Tunes 8 spots, like eating a giant burger in the middle of a food fight. And I remember being downtown in front of the Much Music building where they have this wall of videos at Speaker's Corner, which is a place where people would just walk in and do video testimonials and they would end up on TV. So there's this giant wall of TVs and I'm standing there in front of it waiting for a streetcar or something like that, or I was just there, and that commercial came on behind me, and some lady stopped, looked at me, pointed at the TV, pointed at me, and went like with a big open mouth, and I looked behind me, and there's my fucking face, and I went, oh god damn it, I'm never going to live this down. But luckily, people's memories are very short, and those commercials last for no time at all. So whatever. But it was me, and then the girl who was the other lead had to shove like a giant handful of fries in her mouth. So regardless, though, that was, yeah, every time something like that happens, it's like a moment of like, oh, I'm in the zeitgeist or whatever. But people's memories aren't really that long. So it's more just you get a memory, you get a story to tell, and you know that you've done all this work. Like I've authored hundreds of Blu-rays and DVDs at this point that are all over the market. The Hunky Boy edition of Psycho Goreman, I authored that and created some fun special features and made all the menus and all that. Like that's part of what I do for a living. So I see my work in terms of authoring out in the world all the bloody time because I make so many retail editions to things. So you get a nice little, oh yeah, I did that. But or same thing with like trailers. I cut tons of trailers, so it's like, oh yeah, that's my trailer. But it's after a while, it's just like, cool, great. Well, what do I have to do? What's on my schedule to do today? And you just move on with your day.
Thank you very much for coming on here and speaking to Horror Cult Films. It's Clapboard Jungle, folks, going to be available from April the 12th on what looks like an absolutely excellent Arrow edition, where it's, I believe, 5 hours of additional content.
No, it's way more than that. There's 5 hours of additional I added content. It up, and if you watched everything on the Arrow Blu-ray, including all the commentary tracks, it's 24 hours of material.
Shit, 24 hours of material, and available to pre-order. It should be to pre-order. I don't know when this is going out, but it should still be to
April
pre-order.
12th. Yeah. Sorry, I'm an idiot. You mean this?
Yes, yeah. There should still be time left to pre-order. If not, go out and purchase it. Oh, and you mentioned the Clapboard Jungle series. When do people get to watch that?
The goal is to deliver it to our partners in the summer, so at some point later this year. I'm not 100% sure the exact release date because we're still in post-production, but by the end of the year, it'll be out.
Excellent. Well, we shall keep people updated on the UK release. Justin, thank you so much again, and I really look forward to having Clapboard Jungle in my collection.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
They say never meet your heroes. I don't know if I'd call Justin my hero as such, but I really, really admire him. What a fucking guy, I think that film is brilliant. It's my favourite film from last year. It was the one that made the biggest impression on me. It was such a satisfying journey that we see. In fact, he's very lucky that the journey he had was a satisfying one to do that with. But we see the whole process. We've got writing, we've got directing, we've got effects, we've got acting, funding, distributing, and even a little bit about reviewing. Every stage of the film process. What did you think of this one, Emma?
I mean, I loved Clapboard Jungle. I think it was one of those films where you were sort of holed up watching all of the Fright Fest films in the living room, and it was one where I had sort of seen, I think I just happened to be in the room when you started watching it, and I sat down and watched it with you. I just thought it was brilliant. I think that it really well establishes the tone, like right from the very beginning. It's this sort of like dry sense of humour, but it is very warm. because I think he starts off by saying, they say not to make a film about yourself, filmmaking, or to open it with a quote, and then he does all of those things. And just as it goes on, I think the editing is really witty. Like, you know, my favorite bit, I think, is when he's on the phone to somebody who's giving him like advice about, I don't know if it's a pitch or if it's about just a script in general. And they're telling him that they don't really think that the concept is clear. It doesn't really work. And then it like splices to an interview with his parents about how they say he doesn't take criticism very well. And then goes back to this phone call. Like, I just think he comes across as a really, really likable guy. And because, again, like the great Rocky, this is sort of an underdog story. So
even has a training montages.
Indeed. Like, we have to like him for it to work as a film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, Justin, he's a very good avatar for the audience. Because, you know, you imagine a lot of people in the audience will want to be filmmakers. You know, and it's admirable that this guy has been filming himself at a point where, you know, he didn't have a big project greenlit at this point yet, you know. Mm. He'd started making his film about trying to make films when he himself was yet to get one properly funded, you know, through investors, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a great sort of synchronicity thing, really, you know, that he's doing that whilst also, you know, he's maturing as a filmmaker in front of our eyes, and he's also becoming more successful as a filmmaker too, you know, I mean, across a 5-year period. He could have quit the business by that point, you know, we don't know, like, if Lifechanger hadn't worked out, but it's so good that Lifechanger did work out. It's a decent film, and it's great that we get to see him touring this as a kind of emotional climax, because, you know, the film would have to end at some point. He had to stop making this documentary at some point. It's brilliant that he got to do it with these circumstances.
Yeah. I think something that really struck me about the film, especially rewatching it, was that although it's a film about filmmaking, the problems that it identifies in what barriers there are to pursuing creative dreams and trying to make projects happen are sort of common to other areas. You know, it's not just about filmmaking. This problem of oversaturation, which is mentioned quite a lot in the film, about there being so much content and more people wanting to make stuff than ever before. And this being kind of a problem when it comes to trying to get your name out there. Like, even though it's potentially very easy to make films or you know, you could say to write books or whatever, the problem is how you then market them and how you then get them to the consumers.
Oh, absolutely. Like they say during the documentary, there will be so many great films that are just simply unwatched, you know? In fact, one of the good things about writing for Horror Cult Films is getting screeners of movies that I never would see otherwise, like something like Felt, for instance. Yeah. Felt is a movie, I loved it, 5-star film. I would never have looked that one out by choice, and I don't even know that I would have had the option. I don't think it's even available in the UK yet. And that was a film I reviewed years ago. So, you know, he's right about the aspect of luck that comes into it too. And I like that that's something that does come up in it. You know, this guy doesn't buy his own hype. It's a really sort of warts and all portrayal we get here. You know, it's a very intimate one. I mean, you know, we see him working out. You know, we see him losing out on deals and stuff. Fuck. In one weird bit, we even see him in the shower. I don't know what the filming was about for that. It could be this year's version of the bath scene in Tiger King, but I should have asked him about that. Damn it.
I don't think so. I mean, for me, like, that didn't stick out to me as, like, very, very strange, because you're seeing him do, like, all sorts of mundane tasks. Like, I think it's interesting, like, across the years, you still see the same sort of shot of him hunched over his computer screen, like, doing editing, you know, and I think we just get a sense of, like, what the daily life is like. The fact that he's got the same sofa in that room, and the sofa appears in I think it appears in his short film as well, because he's just using, you know, the environment that's around him. I think it's a really for me, it was really interesting to see how much of his life kind of seemed like really quite claustrophobic in that room. But then also you see him traveling, touring, trying to get out there to get the film out there. So I guess him filming himself in the shower to me was just like, oh, right, okay, so we're seeing him vulnerable and like unfiltered or whatever.
I mean, I'm sure that was the artistic reason for it. He does let himself be very vulnerable in it, like I think something that really works about it is he is able to do an underdog story about himself that seems very genuine. And he also seems to absolutely love what he does. Like, this is both a cautionary tale and a total celebration of cinema.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of how great it is to work in this industry, but at the same time, how fucking horrible it can be.
But I think also something I appreciated about the film was that he did highlight his own position as a white man in an industry that's dominated by white men, but had sought out, female producers and directors and asked for their perspective on things, and had, was highlighting the fact that this is a really male-dominated industry. And while he's finding it difficult to make films, there are people who are even more marginalized and who, have other barriers that they have to cross, as well as, just the general difficulties that come with trying to get a small film made if you don't have a lot of money behind you.
I suppose it's that sort of is a thing that he's saying, look, I can't speak for everyone's experience here. Some people have it a lot harder than me. Some people probably have it easier than me. But at the end of it, he seems to suggest it's worth it. It's just something about having your movies out there, having yourself sort of immortalized on screen like that. I find the whole section of him touring the world really rewarding to watch. Because this is coming out before the Blu-ray, I guess I don't really want to talk too much about the lesson at the end of the whole thing. But, people watching it on Blu-ray will be aware, hopefully, that Lifechanger got made. If or not, it'd be strange to watch a documentary that includes the making of it. But I think there's something very life-affirming about the whole movie, and yet this is not Steven Spielberg here. This isn't like a huge director going off and doing this. It's a relatively small filmmaker who's taking us along on his journey, and he meets some really good guests as well. You've got like Tom Savini, George Romero, Barbara Crampton, Guillermo del Toro, and Lloyd Kaufman. I remember watching the Horror Crowd, which screened at the same Fright Fest as it, and no offence to the Horror Crowd team, very good documentary in its own right, but the guest list was just so different here. It's a different league of people he's got access to, and when you see people like Sid Haig now, who's no longer with us, it's a very, very impressive cast that he got for it.
Mm-hmm. I think that, I would wonder if he would derive the same kind of sense of satisfaction, and like he speaks at one point in like earlier in the documentary about feeling like he's not really feeling fulfilled artistically. I would wonder if finishing this film, this documentary, if he looks back on it and would feel the same sort of sense of accomplishment and achievement as he maybe would with some of his other feature films.
He's got a good background as a documentary filmmaker, without recounting the interview that hopefully everyone's just heard, he talks about crafting a narrative out of 300 hours of footage, and then going, well, what am I going to prioritize? What are my big themes for this? And I think the other thing that really made me do was think about myself as a reviewer. Okay, I've always got to be, and I try to do this anyway, but it made me want to be constructive rather than cruel. You do get bad films. We talked about some bad films in the last episode, for instance, like Man of Steel. But at the same time, we should never forget the literally thousands of names in the credits for some of these films, whether it's the caterer there, whether it's the director, whether it's one of the stars. It's a huge investment for them, and it's a miracle, as you say in that, it's a miracle that any films get made at all. Like, for one thing, this did not make me want to do was go out there and make a film. I thought, I don't have the drive for this. And I also would not have the patience to do this either.
Yeah. It's interesting, I suppose, for bigger projects, though, that, you know, you are getting the A-list actors or whatever, but sometimes positions, you know, pieces are moved into position before really even a story's there. Whereas I guess with, you know, something that was highlighted in Clapboard Jungle is that, you know, the less you have to work with, the tighter your core elements need to be. Like, the storytelling really needs to be there, because you're not necessarily going to get the best actors in the world, or you're not necessarily going to have the biggest budget for special effects or whatever, but the cheapest thing really is the story. You know, the easiest thing in terms of like resources you need is like creating that narrative that like is doing something fresh or original or satisfying for the audience. Whereas like some of these big budget films, you know, people are going to go and watch like the next, no matter how terrible it is, people will continue to go and watch the next Star Wars film or the next like Marvel film or the next, well, maybe not, but in theory, the next DCU film. So I guess I don't know. It's just my personal opinion. I think that sometimes the story there comes secondary because there's already a market.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of these bigger movies, with the studio system, you got these films that are going to be there as product. You know, they're there to be watched. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was doing an interview with the director of Rings, and he spent a lot of the interview talking about his previous movie, which is not necessarily a great sign when he's not hyping up the one that he's currently working on. But he explained it. He explained his attachment to the new Rings film. He said, "Look, the script was already written when I got involved with this project. You know, they already had sections figured out. I just came in and shot it." Right? You know, this wasn't a guy that loved what he did. The thing is, from his perspective, Rings was always going to come out. So why not be a part of the film? You know, I mean, fuck it. Francis Ford Coppola said something very similar about the movie Jack. You know, the Robin Williams one, where he's a young boy who's taught by Jennifer Lopez and he fancies her and other things like that. And at one point in the film, Bill Cosby teaches him how to fart, right? And you're like, yeah, that was directed by the same guy as The Godfather, right? But
I think I'm having like flashbacks to watching this as a very, very young child and being traumatized by it.
And the thing is, Coppola just said, look, Jack was gonna be made anyway. I just wanted to make it as good a movie as I reasonably could.
I just wanted to build this summer house with the proceeds from Jack.
Yeah, whereas like the indie circuit must be such a different mentality. I remember when I was watching Rings, and the director firstly, I asked him what he thought of the series. You know, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'd seen some of them." Right? Like some. There's only fucking 2 American ones, right? But he's like, "Yeah, I've seen some of them." And as we were getting nearer to the premiere, I saw more footage from it. I thought, I don't think this looks like a very good film at all. So I was asking Sony, I was going, like, Sony, can I just put the interview up on a separate day from the review, you know, to build up the hype, right? And Sony are like, no, must be the same day. It's got to embargo till the release date, and you need to have a review up on the release date. So, you know, this big review, however long it is, goes up at the same time as a 1.5 star review. So I don't think they liked me. I think it was like, how do you fuck up a new version of A Ring of the Viral Age? You have one immediate built-in premise, which is a YouTube video of Samara, right? And they're like, no, what we're going to do is we're going to do another origin story that's set in a rural area. You go, nice. Anyway.
That was something I enjoyed about the Saw trailer, was that the plainy tape was a USB stick. That was a nice update for the times.
Anyway, because of Clapboard Jungle, the point being that, yeah, you're not going to have quite the same trade-off of art versus commerce. I mean, there must be people who change their dream project in order to get it distributed. And I imagine that sort of compromise is probably fairly common.
I also think depending on how much money you've got behind you in the first place or how much security you have, like you have more flexibility around, what decisions you make around how creatively involved you'll remain with your project, because there was somebody, I've forgotten who in the documentary was talking about how, if somebody says, okay, we're going to buy this project off of you, or we're going to continue this, but we're going to ask somebody else to be involved as the director, then you know that the project is viable. So somebody else is likely to give you the money and they're willing to keep you on. But, if you're like, at breaking point financially, by the time somebody like gives you that offer, that's going to change your decision, I would assume.
Yeah. I mean, I think another, like where we're maybe making a bit of a false dichotomy here, though, is you've got quite a lot of filmmakers who make a name for themselves on the indie circuit, and then studios approach them just because of how much acclaim they can get. If you can make your own films almost like an adjective, like, when you hear like we know what a Tarantino film is, for instance. And I guess I'm thinking of the new Suicide Squad trailer where you're going, okay, well, this is James Gunn. James Gunn didn't start making this sort of film, but at the same time, James Gunn's only been offered these films off the back of being good at making James Gunn films. So that sort of journey seems relatively rare, but at the same time, it must be very rewarding. You still keep the distinctly you part of what you do because that's what they're investing in. But at the same time, you're also working with one of the bigger franchises in the world.
But is it not also, I mean, James Gunn, to be fair, was working for a bigger franchise. It sort of smacks with similarity of disgraced Marvel directors being offered lesser DCU projects. Now, I know that James Gunn is, I think, made up with Disney and Marvel over like whatever controversy there was around his offensive tweets that were dug up. And I think he is signed back onto Guardians 3. But I don't think that the new Suicide Squad looks great. And although I really love the Guardians films, I'm not sure that James Gunn can sculpt a beautiful statue from the material.
I don't know. I think with this, it'll have a much more sort of punky vibe to it. Something that's maybe a bit more like his older films is kind of, because he started off doing trauma films. Oh, I was so happy to see Lloyd Kaufman on the documentary there. I remember.
Snappy dresser.
Yeah, Snappy Dresser, Uncle Lloyd. I remember tweeting him a while ago, everyone, because there's a story about him appearing in Rocky. So I go, Lloyd, is it true that you appeared in Rocky? He tweets me back and goes, yeah, I played the part of drunk bum. Sylvester Stallone carries me into the bar at one point, which, if you watch the film, it takes up quite a good 10 seconds or so. He goes, Sylvester Stallone carries me into the bar. He was my supporting actor. I was like, love him.
A dad joke.
But yeah, like that's how James Gunn started, doing that sort of trauma stuff. And then it won Sliver, good old Michael Rooker appearing in it again. So yeah, I reckon he'll probably do quite a good job.
Oh gosh, yes, Slither was one of those films that we watched during some of these Saw marathons. It's Nathan Fillion in it with who else is in it?
He is in it, I believe.
Yeah, who's the female actor who's in it as well?
It's Elizabeth Banks.
Elizabeth Banks. I was going to say Elizabeth Banks, but then I thought maybe she would be too young for that, but no.
I barely remember Sliver. It was fucking minging. It's my main memory of it.
Oh man, it was bad because I watched it long before I had ever seen like Firefly or anything that would have made Nathan Fillion remotely attractive to me as a teenage girl. So Slither was not the gateway to future fandom.
I personally liked it as a film.
To be fair, I must have seen Slither when I was like 14, so it's possible that my tastes were not as developed as they obviously are now when I'm watching Digimon in 2021, but I would say that it was not my favourite.
I've only seen it once. I remember it being absolutely minging. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, I've always sort of thought if a film can get a visceral reaction out of you, then it's probably doing something quite well. And Yeah, I mean, I even bring that to feelings of disgust. It's important to be emotionally invested in the film you're watching, even if that emotion is disgust.
Probably wouldn't be in my top 3 James Gunn films. That would be Guardians 1, Guardians 2, Scooby-Doo, maybe?
Oh shit, yes, I forgot about Scooby-Doo. How can you forget about Scooby-Doo? Brilliant stuff. So, have you got anything else you want to say about Clapboard Jungle? We've left that one a little bit behind. I just thought overall this is such a heartfelt love letter to cinema.
I think it was very clear from the get-go that Justin McConnell lives and breathes film. You know, the videos of the short films he was making as a teenager were really, really endearing. Sort of reminded me of when I was living in France. I had only 2 DVDs for entertainment, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, and Hot Fuzz. So I watched not only those films like constantly, but also all of the special features. And one of the special features on the Hot Fuzz DVD was a film that Edgar Wright had made when he was in high school, which was essentially like a sort of mock-up for Hot Fuzz. Like the plot is basically the same. Like there's this sort of hooded figure. Even some of the shots are the same actually. Like this sort of like Reaper-like figure who will just appear in the background after like a death has, after a kill has happened. But the point is that, he also is somebody who obviously like from childhood has kind of had this love and had this passion and then kind of like translated that into like a career in the industry, which is obviously very inspirational, whether your passion is filmmaking or whether it's something else, like, but having carried that for so long and having stuck with it despite how obviously challenging it is incredible.
I reckon something that would scare the absolute shit out of me is those marketing conferences that they have, where, hey, sit down in a booth where you've got posters up or concept art detailing the movie, and then people come in and speak to you and you have to do some sort of a super pitch to make it stand out. I just sort of thought, like, okay, the networking part, that'd be an inevitable part of the job, right? But to hit the road every year, to go to a city in another part of the world and sit there with a poster up selling your vision, knowing there's a good likelihood that nothing will come from this. I think it must take so much grit to carry on with that. There's a bit with the Sky Sharks team, and the Sky Sharks team are mentioning they've been going there for like 21 years or something, I mean, not just with Sky Sharks, but they've been going continuously. They're trying to get money for Sky Sharks in like 2015. And I remember seeing that film in 2020. It took 5 years for that to get released. And in fact, it wasn't even properly released over here, I don't believe. I think it was like it got a screening. It got a screening at Fright Fest. I don't believe I can purchase Sky Sharks right now. In fact, I'm actually going to. I'm not going to buy it because I didn't like it, but I want to see it out of curiosity. Yeah. You currently can't buy Sky Sharks right now, so and we see in 2015. In 2015, people are trying to get money from investors to make this. I may not have believed in that film. The people who made it really, really did,
Yeah.
They must have lived and breathed Sky Sharks.
But I think something that the film makes quite clear is that, it reminds me of that like Stephen King quote that I think it's talent is cheaper than table salt. What separates a talented individual from the successful one is a lot of hard work. But it's not just hard work at your talent. It's you're basically running a business. You have a product to sell and you have to market that product. You have to distribute that product, and how successful you're going to be at that is going to very much depend on meeting the right people and convincing them that it's worth their investment, the investment of their resources, the investment of their time. And the people who are best at that are not necessarily, I mean, I'm sure there will be crossover, but the people who are best at convincing other people that they are worth that investment are not necessarily going to be the ones who are making the greatest films.
Mm. I mean, as we say in the documentary, you can't just be a director any longer, or you've got to be, you've got to have a head for marketing. You've got to have a head for legal jargon as well. And you've got to be out there fronting your movie.
Have people around you that do. Or have people around you that do. You need to be able to collaborate. You need to find the people who, if you have deficits in your abilities, that they can make up for them.
Yeah, because that's another thing that comes through in this documentary, that in the film industry, there's not really such thing as individual success. All of these are reliant upon a big team of people that no matter what their part in the vision, they still believe in the vision enough to be able to contribute to it, We're willing to take time out to do something, and often they're taking a risk because they don't know that this thing's necessarily going to make any money.
Yeah, and the bigger the film, the more people that you need to kind of believe in that vision and to commit to it. Because, I was saying earlier that a lot of what the film explores could be applied to other industries or other art forms, but film is probably the most complicated business at a high level, or at a feature film level, because of how many different things are going on at once and how many different people, particularly actors and artists and people who are potentially maybe stereotyped to not necessarily have the easiest temperaments, or to have, I think it sounded like it was sort of euphemistically alluded to in the film, or sort of saying people have their own needs and wants and egos. You are probably because of the sort of precariousness of the business, and because of the amount of personal, investment that you have to put into it to get to the level where you can be part of projects like this. The stakes are really high for people. Essentially, it'll make it difficult to work under really high pressure scenarios. So if you're doing that at a level where there's also this threat of maybe the money's not going to be there, or maybe things are going to all fall apart, then I can imagine it's a really, really difficult situation to be in.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially as you've got to spend money to make money. They've got things like paying for hotel rooms and flights just to get the opportunity to pitch your film to the right people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're going into this industry completely broke, it must be really, really scary. Or you just have the door. You just feel like the door has been slammed in your fucking face. So, Huge respect on my part to Justin and everyone else who makes the films that we cover, even the films I don't like. It's certainly not for me to take away anything from the achievement of the people who've made them. And I dare say that Zack Snyder is not going to be sitting there losing sleep, going, David didn't like Man of Steel."
But Zack Snyder had to make Man of Steel in order to make the Justice League. Snyder Cut. So, he got there eventually. Forget the success he'd had before then.
I don't think I asked you. Do you reckon Snyder Cut knocks Wonder Woman off the best of DC? I don't think it does. I think Wonder Woman's still the best.
No way. No. Yeah, I think Wonder Woman is still a bit. I would put, having recently ranked all of the MCU films, I would, and most of them, remember, I suppose, that I would be ranking them based on I enjoy a superhero movie. I'm quite happy to watch a superhero movie. I don't expect it really to do anything other than kind of fulfill the basic beats of that genre, and it's going to be a fun, visually spectacular experience. And the ones that I prefer are also quite funny and potentially subversive, like Thor Ragnarok, or maybe the first Guardians film would be the ones I would probably place higher. Oh, and the original Iron Man. But having ranked them all, I would say most of them for me fell in the 4-star area. And I would say that Wonder Woman was probably about as good as some of my middling Marvel films. Whereas the Snyder Cut, I think it was much better than all of the other films than Wonder Woman. But But I don't know that it. I think it's just a different beast. Like Wonder Woman, I think can just be enjoyed as like a sort of standalone film, and it doesn't really need like the build up of some of the others. Whereas I would say with some of the later Marvel films, you gain more from them because you have a context of the wider universe, and you know the characters from different films, and you kind of come with that knowledge of their character as it's been built up over like potentially 10 years prior to that film that you're watching.
Speaking of building things up over a long period, Scream Quadrilogy next time. Emma, out of curiosity, have you got any strong views on the Scream films?
I like them more than I was expecting to like them. I think Courtney Cox and David Arquette, they're the only characters that are in all of them.
No, Neve Campbell's in all of them.
Oh, forget Neve Campbell. I mean, that tells you everything that I need to say about Neve Campbell in the Scream films.
Yeah, your fandom doesn't go to great lengths.
No, it doesn't go to great lengths. I mean, I would say maybe the first and the fourth ones are my favourite Scream films.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the correct answer.
Glad I've got your approval.
Well, yeah, so next time, me, Ross, Jim, and I believe Steph will be talking Screams 1 to 4. Folks, thank you very much for joining Horror Cult Films for our first interview with the legendary Justin McConnell. Thank you again so much if you're listening to this, Justin. It was great having you on this show here. Oh, by the way, we didn't give a star rating. For me, Clapboard Jungle is a definite 5 stars. What do you reckon, Emma?
I give it 5.
Yeah. It's going to be available from Arrow Video on the 12th of April. And if you add up the commentary tracks, this comes with a whopping 24 hours worth of extras. So that means that you can spend an entire day with Justin. And having just spent an hour with him, I would gladly spend an entire day in his company. Thank you all very much, folks, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Bye!
And reviews, check out HorrorCultFilms.co.uk. Music by White Bat Audio.